Trump has turned around and given the impression that America wants to take complete control of Greenland. He wants it to become another state of the United States, and this is in the best interests of the United States, of the Greenland people, and of the rest of the world. He's been quite bold in his statements, but I think this is a lot of Donald's rhetoric rather than it being statements of substance. I could be proved wrong, but there are a number of things which make me think this. And the biggest one is there's already a defense agreement between the United States and Greenland, brackets Denmark, who own Greenland, and it was signed in 1951. And it allows the United States to base effectively as many troops, as much military capability on Greenland to help protect it from a military perspective and from a wider NATO perspective. And therefore it's focused on the threats that Donald Trump is focused on, which is Russia, and with NATO's growing sphere of influence, China. So why Donald Trump's coming out and talking about the ownership of a piece of land rather than just putting an enhanced military capability on it where there is already an agreement in place, I think this is just rhetoric coming out of them. There's a couple of things with regard to Greenland. The first one is, as we get the thawing of the ice caps and the northern passages around the north of Canada, north of Greenland, so that it gets easier access between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, it is a trade route for the United States. The United States has got two trade routes that go between there, which are easy for them. There's a Panama Canal, and we saw Donald Trump, when he first came in, threaten the Panama Canal and stop Chinese ownership of the ports at either end of that. And then we've got the northern routes around Greenland. And within that, there is a move for control of the Arctic. And in the Arctic region, there's assessed to be huge amounts of natural resources under the Arctic. And under Greenland itself, there's assessed to be huge amounts of rare earth metals, which is something that I've seen Donald Trump mention time and time and time again as something he's fixed on. The fact that those rare earth metals are under, tens or hundreds of meters of ice and will be virtually impossible to get hold of doesn't seem to be something that Donald Trump has in the back of his mind. But you bring that together with its strategic position in the Atlantic, covering some of the routes for Russian and potentially Chinese missile submarines to come and potentially threaten the east coast of the United States, then it's got a number of strategic plays that Donald Trump can focus on to say that it's important for them. But I'll go back again and say the Americans have got the ability to put whatever military capability they want on Greenland, as per a 1951 already signed treaty. Well, the Monroe Doctrine is more focused on what he's been doing in Venezuela. And if we go back to when it first came in 1823, it was looking at the European influence in South and Central America. And the fact that European influence was impacting US interests into South and Central America. And the Monroe Doctrine effectively came up with an agreement between America and European countries that European countries would not continue with their expansionism in through South and Central America, and the United States would then leave European countries' interests alone in other parts of the world. I think Donald Trump is invoking that and bringing it forward into Chinese and Russian expansionism into South and Central America, and using the same sort of language around that, which is why people are talking of the Monroe Doctrine. Well, NATO's stance is remaining quite quiet, I think, at the moment. NATO's made up of European nations, Canada, and the United States. The rhetoric that's coming out of the United States and the rhetoric that's come out of Donald Trump against NATO for a long time now has made European members uncomfortable. I think Donald Trump is trying to do two things. I think one, he's trying to get European nations to step up, to spend more on defence, to spend more quickly, and to take a greater Northern Hemisphere burden so that Donald Trump can focus on where he sees the biggest threat, which is China. And I think Trump's actions into Venezuela are sending a message to China. I think the talk of Donald Trump carrying out a military raid into Denmark to physically capture and annex the territory is taking Chinese whispers a little bit too far. Now, Donald Trump isn't whispering it and is being blunt in what he's saying, but if we go back to even very recently, he very bluntly turned around and said that the United States is now running Venezuela, and he said we will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. The reality is on the ground, he's not running Venezuela. The vice president has been sworn in, and therefore what Donald Trump says and what reality is tend to be two completely different things. And therefore I don't think Donald Trump has any intention of putting a military attack into Greenland. He may expand his military presence in Greenland by a long way, but he's got the authority to do that under international law and international agreement with NATO and with Denmark and with Greenland already. We'd see a more disunited West, because we'll have to remember the United States is part of the Western hemisphere, and both politically and militarily. We'd see a more united Europe that has the potential to become more disunited as we get in-house fighting between different countries vying for continued support with the United States. It would certainly have a massive impact on NATO. It would have a massive impact on Northern Hemisphere politics, and it would destabilize the United States as much as it would destabilize Europe and destabilize NATO. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping would be laughing all the way to the bank and to the next bit of territory that they want to take. And therefore it is a distraction. So why Donald Trump doesn't see that, I don't know. It's not clear what his wider intent is with all of this, but I think it is no more than rhetoric. I may be proved wrong though. You never know with Trump. Trump has rightly been critical of NATO because non-US members of NATO have been relying on the United States for just about everything for too many years, for decades. It's always been the United States will come and do this, the United States will provide that. Yeah, and I've been a planner in NATO. I've seen it. I've worked with US troops. I've worked with all the NATO countries. I've planned NATO's military operations. And oh my goodness, would it have been difficult if the United States wasn't at the center of all of them. That's changing slightly. European nations are now standing up and acquiring much more capability themselves. And there is a plan within NATO where you can carry out operations where the United States is not involved in it. And that's why the Deputy Supreme Commander is a British commander, because it was seen that with, and this was set up before the UK left the EU, but it's not linked to the EU. From a European geographic perspective, British commander could pull together the European and Canadian elements of NATO to carry out operations without US direct involvement. And of course, the UK is the chosen nation because we've got a special relationship with the United States from an intelligence perspective, but we're also part of the Five Eyes community, and that will survive almost anything that's going on because that's practical intelligence related. And therefore it gives a bridge between a European NATO and the United States. Certainly there'll be political difficulties. NATO could continue without the United States being involved. And as Europe stands up more and more and more in its support for Ukraine, that gives NATO a greater strength the whole way through. And Trump, in a way, I can see why he is putting pressure on Europe and European nations, because they have been relying on America to pay for Europe's security and Europe's defense for so many years. And with Donald Trump, it all comes down to paying for the support that you get. So he's rightly irked at European NATO members, but the tactics that he's doing to put pressure on Europe are unconventional in diplomatic ways.